So this is the pattern for the carrier, the part that actually holds the pad in place. And when you go to cut this, you'll notice that there's like a V shape here when you put these two pieces together. There should be. Don't try to straighten that out. Keep that as a V shape. The reason for that is we want the end of our carrier to be narrower than down here, so that when we fold it over, we get a nice clean line. And later on in the video, you'll see when I sew that, how that's going to work. So make sure that when you're cutting these, you're going to get this little piece here. It looks sort of like an eye, and these pieces will line up, but then they don't line up. Then there's this little V shape that you're going to cut out every time. You're going to draw around your pattern with the tailored chalk. There is a notch here, and there's a notch here, and here, and that's all those notches are for lining things up to make sure everything's in place. Okay, now we're going to make the carrier, the part of the kit that holds the actual pad. So I'm going to start with the strap. The strap is a rectangle. We're going to fold it lengthwise. Do a small seam, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, no more than that. And start again to back tack. Back tack at the end. Okay, we're going to turn this. I just have a little piece of PVC piping. I'm going to stick it in here. This is why you want to make sure your seam isn't too deep. If it is, you can't get the pipe in there. So you're going to put it through until about there. And take a chopstick. I always use the blunt end of the chopstick. And you're going to push that in there. Whoops. And let this come out the other end. And it's turned. All right, we'll iron that in a minute when we iron everything else. And we'll take a piece of the carrier, one side, and on the back of it, the back side of it, we're going to put a piece of Tyvek. So here's a notch, there's a notch, and you've got notches on your Tyvek. So we're going to line those up here. There. Basically what you're doing here is you are just basting this on. So you want to keep very close to the edge. Let it lay nice and flat. And don't pull on your fabric, just let it lay there. Go all the way around it, and it's really important to keep to the edge of this because you're going to use that stitching line as a guide later on in the sewing process. You don't need to back tack because again we're just holding it in place. Get rid of all your threads, and that's what that looks like. Then the strap has a seam. Instead of putting the seam on the edge, I put it in the back so it's totally out of sight. like that. You see the seam running down there. And then I just press that. See, so it's nice and neat on this side. Then you fold it in half. And cut it. Now you have two straps. There's a stitch from your Tyvek across here and across that end. And what you do is you put these straps with the seam down 1 inch from that stitching and straight across. So you really want to make sure that you have equal distance from here to there. If you feel like you can't do that by eye, use your measuring tape. So I've got those in place, and again I'm going to stitch right on the edge because all we're doing is basting these in place. Now I'll put the other one down here. And then I'm going to baste them on the other side. Again, make sure they're nice and straight. Now the straps are on. Under this is a notch. Is that the notch? Yeah. It's a notch here. It's a really small notch, but it's there. And there's a notch there. So you want to put the notch ends together. If you don't do that, let me show you what will happen. If you do it the other way around, see, it doesn't match up because you have a front and a back to this pad. So you have to make sure that your notched edges are together. Here's my notch. There's a notch. So then it will line up beautifully. I start with the unnotched end. And I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to start by back tacking. I want to keep my edges really nicely together. If the cutting is really nicely done, it works beautifully. If you don't do your cutting carefully, then you fight with the whole thing. You want to make sure at this end, sometimes the notches get cut a little big. You want to make sure that you get that notch in your seam. Otherwise, you're going to have a hole there when you turn out. So these notches are really little, so I'm not going to have any trouble. But sometimes you just have to pay attention to that. hold your edges together. And you want to back tack. Okay, this is the most important part of the whole thing, is right now. So I've sewn this thing. It looks great on the side that I sewed it on, but you have to turn it around. And you have to check to make sure that you got everything. Now, I would say here that my stitching is too close to the edge. So I'm going to go back in there, and I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper, because if a girl is wearing this and, you know, there's too much activity, she can pull that seam right out. So I don't want that to happen. So I'm gonna back tack there a little bit, and just go in a little bit, not much, but just enough to make sure that this is going to be stable. So now I've got it so that everything looks like it's all secure. All right, and I make sure that my notch is within the seam up here. It is. Okay. So now the next step for this, cut the corners a little bit on the finished edge, just a little, just so it's not as bulky in there. All right. Now you start on the end that's closed. Push it down a little bit. You're going to turn it. And you can do this with just a regular yardstick, piece of wood, you know, whatever, dowel. The part where it's a little hard to turn is where the Tyvek is, so just be gentle. There you go. Now, what's happening here, I'm glad this happened so that I can explain it. There's this stitching of your strap on the outside. Remember, that's supposed to go down? That just means when I put the yardstick through here, I got it on the wrong side of the strap. So all you need to do is turn them to the other side. And then they're the right way. You want to pull everything out nice and carefully. Now, I often use a knitting needle, but you can also use a straight pin to get your corners. See, I don't like that. That looks ugly to me. I want it to be nice and as much of a nice sharp corner as you can get. But be careful with the knitting needle because it can go right straight through. So just be gentle. That's way better. So now I'll go over